A question of identity. Western Cape teacher Glen Snyman got into trouble when identifying himself as African on his CV. He previously referred to himself as coloured on other documents. The provincial Education Department has now withdrawn fraud charges against Snyman. He's a well-known campaigner against race classification. Education MEC Debbie Schäfer speaks to us now. Debbie, a very good morning to you. Tell us what's going on here.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, yes, as we know, yesterday there was an article in the media where it was reported that Mr. Snyman was being charged by my department for fraud. And the reason, seemingly, after I'd started making inquiries, was because he had previously said he was a particular race group and then had changed that. But the concern for me is, obviously, I wanted to know all the facts because one can't jump to conclusions. But at the end of the day, the question really came down, why are we charging somebody for identifying with a particular race? So, and who decides what race he is? And the concern I had also was, why were people asking for evidence if he wanted to change his classification? So it's a very complex issue, but I didn't feel it was something that he should be charged for.
And does he raise important issues? I mean, he's against race classification. Is this something that needs to be looked at when putting out your information?
It certainly does, and this whole issue has really raised what, in our view, is quite ridiculous race classification, which is reminiscent of apartheid, and that it's a fundamental basis of employment equity legislation. Now, obviously, we all accept that there has to be diversity in workplaces and so on, but the real question comes about is how do you define it? And I'm having a very careful look now at our forms to see what exactly we're putting in there and what the law actually requires. Because when you look at the Employment Equity Act, there's no definition of African. There's a definition of black, generic, which says African, Indian, and coloured, but there's no definition as to what those are either. So who decides whether you are coloured or black? And it's reminiscent of pencil tests. And I do think it's time now that we really start having these discussions in far more detail as to how we go forward.
Okay, I mean, yes, you talk about the pencil test. I mean, the fact that people were saying, how do you prove it is incredibly worrying, isn't it? The fact that that mentality is still there.
It is, but I mean, it's also exacerbated by the fact that we have to comply with equity targets. And how do you do that? There is an issue of how do you decide, what your target is and who's meeting those targets. So it raises fundamental questions, which is why we, my political party, as you know, has recently said we don't agree with racial classification. We agree with the disadvantaged, but that does not necessarily have to be based on race.
Okay, so what happens next in this conversation?
Well, the charges have been withdrawn against him, and I'm pleased about that. But what I certainly am doing is getting all the facts together as to what exactly happened and how it happened, and interrogating the legislation and the forms that we are required to fill in by the national government. And we will see from there how we take it forward. But I think it's raised an important issue that needs further discussion and interrogation, and I'm certainly going to do that.